Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name is Evan McCready, and I am, or was, a junior air traffic controller at Philadelphia International Airport 142 days ago. The world below me changed forever. Since then, I've been living in this control tower, 200 feet above a sea of cracked asphalt, rusting aircraft, and things that never stop moving when the sun goes down. When the last evacuation flight left in the early weeks of the outbreak, I didn't go. I was supposed to. Everyone else in the tower did except me. That C-130 Hercules took off from runway 9R in the early hours before dawn, its 4 Allison turboprops thundering over the Delaware River. The last thing I heard on the radio was the crew reporting they're heading for McGuire Air Force Base before static swallowed them. Later, binoculars showed me a black column of smoke in the far distance, and I knew I'd never see that plane again. The reason I stayed? A mix of stubbornness, fear, and a dangerous belief that maybe staying put would keep me alive longer than chasing salvation. Down there, in the streets and highways leading out of Philadelphia, panic had already choked every escape route. People jammed I-95 and the Platte Bridge, cars gridlocked until the sound of chaos reached them. I'd heard the screams through the open tower windows long before I sealed them shut with aircraft-grade tape. From up here, I have a view in every direction, the city skyline to the north, the oil refineries of Paulsboro, New Jersey to the south, the Delaware River cutting a wide silver line to the east, and the sprawling runways and taxiways of the airport itself below. The ground is a mixture of silence and danger. Most of the tarmac is broken by weeds and stains from weathered jet fuel. But the real hazard is movement. The infected wander the open ground between hangars, cargo bays, and jet bridges. They drift like slow shadows during the day, but I've seen them break into a dead sprint at night when something draws their attention. The tower itself is still intact. The main control room has 6 positions: ground, tower, clearance delivery, departure, arrival, and the supervisor's console. I know each one now, though I was only officially trained for ground and clearance. The walls are lined with large glass panes reinforced with metal framing, and I've draped them with tarps from the maintenance stores to keep my light from leaking out at night. I sleep on a cot in the break room behind the radar consoles, and my food supply comes from 3 sources: the vending machines in the staff lounge, the unclaimed emergency rations from the airport security office, and a stash I've made from careful scavenging in the concourse when I dared to go down. Water was my biggest concern at first, but the tower has an old Culligan filter system and a rooftop rainwater catchment I rigged using spare aviation fuel drums and tarpaulins. Rainwater isn't perfect, so I boil it on a camping stove I found in a TSA-confiscated items bin. Life settled into a routine as much as it can in this world. By day, I scan the surrounding area with binoculars, watching the runways for signs of life, or more accurately, signs of anything dangerous. I've seen airliners sitting in remote parking stands, doors open and stairs extended, their fuselages baking in the sun. I've also seen what happens when the infected find their way into one. But the strangest sight came on day 140. It was mid-afternoon and I was running a power check on the tower's backup generator. The airport's main grid is dead, but the tower's diesel backup, a Cummins 125 kilowatts, still works if I ration it. That day, as I was checking the fuel levels, the VHF radio crackled to life for the first time in months. At first, I thought it was just static. Then a voice came through, faint but urgent. "Control tower, this is Piper November 312 Bravo. Anyone reading? Over." I froze. It had been months since I heard any human voice over the radio. I grabbed the mic. November 312 Bravo. This is Philadelphia Tower. I read you faint but clear. State your position. There was a pause. Then the voice came again, a little more desperate. I'm about 7 miles west of you, near Lansdowne. I'm on the ground. I can't get airborne engine trouble. There's no safe place here. They're in the streets. I checked my map. A small municipal field called Lansdowne Airstrip had been decommissioned years ago. If he was there, it meant he'd landed on a strip that was probably overgrown, surrounded by neighborhoods that had gone bad weeks after the outbreak began. Say your fuel status, I asked, out of habit. Fuel's fine. Engine won't start. I've got maybe 2 days of supplies left. If you can see me from up there, I'll light a signal at night. But I can't hold out much longer. His voice cracked on that last part. I wanted to help, but the reality hit me immediately to get to Lansdowne. I'd have to leave the safety of the tower, cross the open airport, make it into the terminal concourse, and somehow find a vehicle that worked. Then I'd have to drive through miles of infected streets, get him, and make it back alive. The idea gnawed at me all night. I told myself I couldn't do it, too dangerous, too many unknowns. But when I saw his signal the next night, a faint orange flicker far to the west, visible just above the tree line, I knew I wasn't going to be able to ignore it. The problem is, the concourse is not safe anymore. The last time I went down there, I nearly didn't make it back. The infected wander in from the parking decks and baggage tunnels, and sound carries too far in those cavernous halls. If I'm going to help this guy, I'll need to plan every step, every doorway, every possible choke point. I took out my laminated terminal map, the same one we used in evacuation planning drills, and spread it over the supervisor's desk. My route to the concourse would start with the service stairwell on the north side of the tower, descend 6 flights to the base, cross the security checkpoint area, and then cut through the short corridor to Terminal A West. From there, I'd need to move through at least 2 concourses to reach the long-term parking decks, my only real chance at finding a working vehicle. The risk wasn't just the infected. With no power in most of the terminal, I'd be moving through long stretches of darkness where shadows could hide anything. I spent hours that night doing a dry run in my head. I listed the equipment I'd need and laid it all out on the break room counter. My primary weapon would be the Remington 870 Police Magnum I'd taken from an abandoned airport police cruiser months ago. I cleaned it twice, checked the action, and counted my shells. I had 24 12-gauge buckshot rounds in total, plus a handful of slugs. Not enough for prolonged fighting, so noise discipline would be critical. My backup would be the Gerber strong-arm fixed blade strapped to my left thigh. I also packed my LED headlamp, a handheld flashlight with a red filter, a pair of TSA-issued nitrile gloves, a roll of duct tape, a folding pry bar, and my compact handheld aviation radio for maintaining contact with the stranded pilot. The tower felt even more isolated that night, like the walls were closing in. I kept scanning west with binoculars, catching that faint flicker of his fire between the treetops, and I imagined what it would feel like to be down there on the ground, completely surrounded. I'd been safe up here for so long that the idea of walking into that kind of danger again was like stepping out onto thin ice. At 0500, the next morning, I started the descent. The stairwell was concrete, the kind where every footstep echoed. I moved slowly, checking corners before committing to each landing. The metal security door at the base of the tower was locked with a deadbolt I'd installed after my last close call. I kept it shut most days to prevent anything from wandering in. I unlocked it, listened for movement, then slipped through and relocked it behind me. The old TSA checkpoint loomed ahead. The conveyor belts were frozen mid-motion, trays still holding half-forgotten items, a set of keys, a paperback novel, a child's toy car. The air smelled faintly of mold and stale coffee. I skirted the edge of the checkpoint, keeping low and moving past the glass booths where agents once stood. Beyond it, the concourse stretched into dim light, the long windows on my right streaked with months of rain and dust. I'd taken maybe 20 steps when I heard it, the soft, irregular scrape of movement somewhere ahead. I ducked behind a pillar, let my breathing slow, and peered around. 2 infected shuffled in the middle distance, one wearing what used to be a U.S. Airways ground crew vest, the other in a wrinkled business suit. They moved without pattern, heads twitching at faint sounds. I waited for them to drift toward the baggage claim corridor before continuing, hugging the left wall where shadows were thicker. Every sound was magnified in that dead terminal. The rubber soles of my boots made the faintest squeak against the polished tiles, so I shifted to a half step, rolling my feet to keep quiet. I passed through the food court, tables overturned, paper cups scattered like leaves. The smell here was worse. Something had rotted in one of the back kitchens. I didn't stop to find out what. The first real challenge came at the intersection between Terminals A and B. The wide open space left me exposed, and there was no way around it. I moved quickly, head swiveling, shotgun raised just enough to fire if I had to. A faint clatter echoed from the direction of the moving walkways, but I made it across without contact. When I reached the parking deck access door, I paused to listen. Silence. I used my pry bar to force the latch, the metal groaning softly as it gave way. Inside, the deck was dark, except for slivers of daylight leaking through ventilation gaps. Rows of cars sat in neat lines, their windshields filmed with dust. My heart was pounding now. This was the moment. If I didn't find something with keys or an intact ignition, this whole rescue was over before it began. I moved methodically, checking glove compartments, under visors, even inside wheel wells. Most of the cars were useless dead batteries, flat tires, or missing keys entirely. Then I spotted it. A white Ford F-250 Super Duty airport maintenance truck, the kind used for runway inspections. The driver's door was unlocked, and when I checked under the floor mat, there they were, the keys. I slid in, shut the door quietly, and tested the ignition. The engine turned over on the second try, the diesel rumbling low. I kept it running only long enough to confirm it would start again, then shut it down to conserve fuel. The tank was half full enough to make it to Lansdowne and back if I took the most direct route. Now I had the means. The real test would be getting it out of here without drawing the entire concourse down on me. The smell of warm diesel still lingered in the cab when I leaned back in the seat and listened. The parking deck had its own kind of silence, not the open-air quiet of the runways, but a low, oppressive stillness, broken only by the occasional tick of cooling metal or the faint drip of water somewhere in the shadows. I stayed there for a full minute, letting my breathing slow and my ears adjust, making sure the sound of the engine hadn't stirred anything. The last thing I needed was to open the truck door and find I'd drawn a half dozen of them from the lower levels. When I was sure it was clear, I climbed out and started checking the truck's storage compartments. Maintenance crews kept all kinds of useful gear in these, sometimes for runway lighting repairs, sometimes for wildlife control. Inside the first side compartment, I found a heavy mag light, a flare gun with 3 cartridges, and a coiled tow strap. The rear toolbox yielded a small hydraulic jack, a set of insulated gloves, and a battered first aid kit. I took everything I thought I might need, laying it in the passenger footwell where I could reach it quickly if things went wrong. The next step was getting the truck to a position where I could make a clean exit when the time came. I didn't want to start it up and roll right now. Every second I spent idling here increased the chance that the noise would carry into the terminal and bring trouble to the deck. So instead, I began scouting the nearest ramps, looking for the one that would get me to the airport's perimeter road the fastest. The east ramp was partially blocked by a delivery van that had crashed sideways into the guardrail months ago. That left the west ramp, which spiraled down toward an employee lot that backed onto the perimeter fence. From there, it would be a short, exposed run along the service road to the airport's outer gate. I didn't like the exposure, but it was the cleanest shot I'd have. I returned to the truck and sat behind the wheel, mapping the route in my head. Once I made the decision to go, there wouldn't be any turning back. The infected weren't like people in the old world. You couldn't just lose them by ducking down another street. If they heard the engine, some of them would follow for blocks. I waited until early afternoon, timing my departure so that by the time I reached Lansdowne, I'd still have a few hours of daylight to work with. Moving in darkness was suicide unless you were somewhere you knew better than your own hands. When I finally turned the key again, the diesel came to life without hesitation. The sound was deafening after so much silence, and I found myself gripping the wheel tighter than I meant to. I eased it into gear and crept toward the west ramp, letting the engine idle low to keep noise down. The ramps were narrow, and the truck's mirrors barely cleared the concrete pillars in some spots. Halfway down, I caught movement in the corner of my eye, a figure stepping out from behind a parked sedan 2 rows over, then another. They weren't sprinting yet, but they'd heard the engine. The sound would carry even further outside. I didn't wait for them to close the distance. I pressed the accelerator, the diesel growling louder as I swung out onto the lower deck and rolled toward the daylight. The blast of open air as I exited the deck was almost disorienting after hours in the tower and the stale gloom of the terminal. Ahead, the employee lot stretched to the chain-link perimeter fence. Beyond it, the perimeter road curved around the edge of the airport toward the west. I could see the service gate wide open, the swing arms frozen where they'd been left during the last evacuation. The road beyond was littered with debris. Luggage carts, a toppled fence panel, and the bleached skeleton of a 737 fuselage mock-up once used for fire drills. I kept my speed low enough to swerve around obstacles, but not so slow that anything could keep up if it came running. The cab rattled with every bump, the sound of gear and the passenger footwell shifting with each turn. The moment I crossed the airport boundary, it hit me how much had changed beyond my patch of relative safety. Weeds had broken through the asphalt in long green seams. Street signs leaned at angles, some missing entirely. Storefronts along the access road were dark and empty, their windows either boarded or shattered. The world outside the fence had fallen apart in ways the tower had shielded me from. Every mile I drove west toward Lansdowne, I passed reminders of the early panic cars abandoned in odd places, crash marks where drivers had swerved into poles, and the occasional scorched patch of pavement where something had burned hot and long. I kept my eyes moving constantly, scanning both the road ahead and the mirrors. The infected could appear anywhere, and in the open, they had space to accelerate frighteningly fast. As I cleared the last industrial stretch near Eastwick and started threading into the outer neighborhoods, the route narrowed into tree-lined streets. The sun filtered through leaves overhead, dappling the cracked pavement with shifting patterns. It would have looked peaceful in another life. But here, every shadow could be something waiting. I kept my right hand resting lightly on the shotgun across the seat, my thumb brushing the safety, ready for whatever waited ahead. Lansdowne was close now. The question was whether the man I'd heard on the radio would still be alive when I got there, and whether I could get him back out. The closer I got to Lansdowne, the more the air changed. It had that still, heavy quality that comes when a neighborhood has been abandoned long enough for the natural world to start reclaiming it. The smell of cut grass and engine exhaust had long since faded, replaced by damp wood, mildew, and the faint, almost metallic tang that seemed to linger wherever the infected had been in large numbers. The streets were narrower here, lined with two-story brick row houses that leaned toward each other as if they were conspiring. Most of the windows were dark holes, some boarded up, others simply shattered. Wind pushed loose siding to clap softly against walls, creating random sounds that made me slow the truck more than once. I rolled with the window cracked an inch, listening for anything that didn't belong. The F-250's diesel was a low, steady rumble under me, but I knew it carried further than I wanted. At an intersection 2 blocks from the airstrip, I stopped behind an overturned delivery van and cut the engine. The sudden quiet was startling. I sat there for a full minute, scanning the street ahead. The airstrip's north perimeter fence was just visible between the houses, rusted chain link with tufts of weeds pushing up along its base. Behind it, I could see the faint white line of what had once been a paved runway, now broken and overgrown. I reached for the handheld radio clipped to my vest. November 312 Bravo, Philadelphia Tower. I'm close. What's your position on the field? My voice felt louder than it should, even in a whisper. A moment later, the reply came back, crackling but clear enough to make my pulse quicken. Tower, I'm in the hangar on the south side, big sliding doors. You'll see a yellow windsock on the roof. Keep your engine noise low. They've been wandering the fence line all morning. That was all I needed to hear. I slipped the radio back into its clip, checked the shotgun, and scanned my approach. I'd have to take the truck down a narrow side street that ran parallel to the fence, then find an opening wide enough to drive through. The main gate to the airstrip was visible from here, but it was choked with debris. A tangled mess of bicycles, pallets, and what looked like the remains of a burned-out sedan. No chance of pushing through without making noise for half the town to hear. I started the engine again, just long enough to roll the truck into the cover of the side street, then cut it once more. From here, I'd have to finish the last stretch on foot. Moving through on foot meant less noise, but it also meant more risk if something broke from cover. I pulled the Gerber knife from its sheath and clipped it to my belt where I could draw it quickly, then slung the shotgun on a single-point strap so it would hang ready across my chest. The fence loomed closer with each step, the links rattling faintly in the wind. I kept low, hugging the line of overgrown bushes that ran along the property boundary. Through the gaps, I could see the cracked surface of the runway stretching into the distance, heat shimmer already rising off it despite the mild weather. No movement immediately inside the fence, but that meant little. They could be still until they weren't. About 50 yards down, I found my opening, a section where the bottom of the chain link had been cut and curled upward. I went flat on my stomach, pushing my pack through first, then sliding under with the shotgun cradled in one arm. My vest scraped against the rusted wire, snagging in one spot before I eased free. Inside, the air felt different again, quieter, like the fence itself held some invisible boundary. The hangar was about 300 yards away across the broken tarmac, its metal walls streaked with rust and its wide doors half open. The yellow windsock above it hung limp. I moved in short bursts from one piece of cover to the next. First, an overturned fuel cart, then the shadow of a disused Cessna whose tires had rotted flat. The closer I got, the more I noticed signs of recent activity. A trail of boot prints in the dust, a scavenged fuel drum with its cap missing, a pile of empty water bottles tucked against the hangar wall. When I finally reached the side of the hangar, I pressed my back to the corrugated metal and listened. Nothing. I edged toward the open doorway and peered inside. He was there. Mid-30s, lean build, dark hair tied back under a sweat-stained baseball cap. His clothes were the layered, practical kind you saw on bush pilots. Worn cargo pants, a faded flight jacket with the cuffs frayed. He was crouched over a small camp stove near the tail of a Piper Cherokee, the same aircraft designation I'd heard over the radio. The nose cowling was open, tools scattered on a rag below it. He looked up the moment he saw me, his expression a mix of relief and disbelief. "You actually came," he said, keeping his voice low but firm. "Didn't think I'd leave you to find out what's over that fence," I replied, stepping inside and letting the door shield me from the open runway. Up close, I could see he'd been here for days, maybe longer. His face was pale under a layer of grime, and the way he moved had that careful, deliberate pace of someone rationing energy. The aircraft's engine compartment was half disassembled, and even from a glance I could tell this wasn't a quick fix. "They've been circling in groups," he said, nodding toward the far end of the hangar where a row of narrow windows looked out over the airstrip. 2 or 3 at a time, sometimes more. The noise from the tools brings them closer, so I work in short bursts. I scanned the hangar's interior: fuel drums, spare tires, a workbench with scattered charts, and a rust-streaked locker that might hold something useful. My eyes kept flicking back to the wide-open gap of the hangar doors. "We'll have to move the truck close if we're getting you out of here," I said, already running the approach in my head. "And that means we need a clear path." He nodded grimly. "Then we've got some work to do before sundown." He followed my gaze toward the open doors and gave a slow nod. "The main taxiway's choked with debris," he said, gesturing with a wrench toward the east side of the field. "And the grass strip south of here is soft. You'll bury the truck if you try it. The west service lane is the only shot we've got, but I've seen movement there the past 2 mornings." I walked over to the edge of the hangar doors, keeping my body tucked behind the frame, and raised my binoculars. From this angle, the west service lane was just visible beyond a row of small maintenance sheds. At first, I saw nothing, only the shimmering heat over the cracked asphalt and the dull reflection of sunlight on broken glass. Then, near the shadow of a leaning light pole, something shifted. 2 shapes, both upright but wrong in the way they held themselves, stood near the perimeter fence. They weren't moving much, just swaying faintly, heads angled toward the soundless air. Even from here, I could feel the weight of their stillness. "We can't leave that pair wandering there when we bring the truck through," I said, lowering the binoculars. "If they hear the engine, they'll be on us before we've even rolled 50 yards. He exhaled through his teeth, glancing toward a battered metal locker near the workbench. "There's an old .22 rifle in there," he said. "Not much stopping power, but it's quiet enough if you've got the patience." I crossed to the locker, swinging the creaking door open. Inside, nestled among rags and an oil-stained flight manual, was a Ruger with a laminated stock. The magazine was loaded but dusty. A cardboard box of 50 rounds sat beside it. I pulled the rifle out, checked the action, then ran a patch through the barrel. The bore wasn't perfect, but it would do. The plan was simple on paper. I'd skirt the inside of the fence using the cover of the sheds, close to within 50 yards of the pair on the service lane, and take them out one at a time. Then we'd scout the lane itself for any other movement, clear it if needed, and bring the truck in before the noise carried too far. We set out through a side personnel door on the hangar's west wall, the hinges groaning softly as I pushed it open. The ground outside was a patchwork of cracked concrete and tufts of grass, with old tie-down points for small aircraft jutting like rusted anchors. I moved first, keeping low, the .22 cradled in my arms, while he followed with a length of rebar in his grip. We didn't talk. The air was too still for voices. The shed smelled of old fuel and mildew, their doors long since warped by the seasons. I used their shadows to mask our approach, pausing every few steps to listen. The pair near the fence hadn't moved far, One had its back to us, the faded remains of a high-visibility vest hanging off its shoulders. The other faced the fence, one arm hooked through the mesh as if waiting for something on the other side. I took the rifle to my shoulder and settled the front sight on the nearer target. The first shot cracked sharply in the quiet. The report softer than any shotgun blast, but still loud enough to make my ears ring faintly. The round struck just above the ear, dropping the figure instantly. The second turned at the sound, head jerking toward us, mouth opening in a soundless motion. I squeezed off another round, this one punching through the temple, and it collapsed in a tangle of limbs against the fence. We stayed frozen for half a minute, scanning the lane and the open ground beyond. Nothing moved. The sound hadn't drawn anything else, at least not yet. We moved quickly then, stepping over the bodies and into the lane. Up close, I could see the debris he'd warned me about. A stack of cracked plastic pallets lay scattered across one side of the asphalt, and several potholes had turned into small craters filled with rainwater. It would slow the truck, but not stop it. The bigger concern was the chain-link gate at the far end. It was still on its hinges, but the padlock had long since rusted solid. "Truck'll fit if we get this open," I said, running my hand along the latch. I pulled the folding pry bar from my pack and wedged it into the gap between latch and post. It took 2 good heaves to snap the corroded steel, the sound sharp enough to make me wince. We swung the gate open just enough for the truck to squeeze through. I marked the angle in my head, too wide and it would block my own exit. Then we retraced our route back to the hangar, keeping the sheds between us and the open field. Inside, I slung the .22 and picked up my shotgun again. "Lane's clear. We'll move the truck now, before anything changes." He didn't argue. We both knew how quickly still ground could turn into something else entirely. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.